Hello, and welcome to my channel. I am Damien Marie AtHope. In the simplest terms, I am an atheist-humanist philosopher and prehistorical writer-researcher at DamienMarieAtHope.com. I am specifically an axiological atheist. An axiological atheism can be thought to involve ethical and value theory reasoned and moral argument driven apatheism, agnosticism, atheism, antitheism, antireligionism, secularism, and humanism. Axiological atheists can be understood as a value theory or a value science atheist. As an axiological atheism's ethically reasoned and constructive pro-humanity. I am an axiological thinker, value theorist. The science of goodness, worthiness, usefulness, valuableness, virtue, reliableness, accuracy, validity, morality, integrity, beneficialness, etc., etc. We axiologists have a value consciousness. And in general, we see the architecture of humanistic humanitarianism value in people that we see as dignity beings. Places and things are not. Axiology is a value theory. In its broadest sense, it involves areas of philosophy that are deemed to encompass some evaluative or evaluation aspect. Therefore, it crosses almost all domains in some way or another. Now for a more detailed terms as to what I am. I am an axiological atheist, an anti-theist, an anti-religionist, secularist, humanist, rationalist, writer, artist, poet, philosopher, advocate, activist with schooling in psychology, sociology, as well as I am an autodidact, self-taught in science, archaeology, anthropology, and philosophy. I promote science and am against pseudoscience, pseudo-history, pseudo-morality, things that are found in religion.
Howdy.
Hey.
How's it going?
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
So I wanted to talk to Johnston to hear his, viewpoints, mainly because I like his ideas in general. Like I talked to him before because we actually I flew to Indiana and met him and tried to do an outreach against Mike Pence.
Nice.
In pro secularism. I even said to religious people, you're welcome to come. I wasn't trying to be. I mean, I am anti-religious, but that's more like my ideology, not like how I behave with people. People always get that confused. Like, I don't hate religious people. I actually feel bad for them. I was a religious person. I was a total believer until 35 in college.
Right.
So I unlike some atheists are less sympathetic towards people that are religious. I'm not saying that that's just all of them, but I mean, there's a lot of atheists that are pretty harsh on religious people, especially if you have, anti-theism and anti-religionism values like I do. Generally, those are not the most favorable people to talk to if you're religious.
Right.
Excuse me. But for me, I it's a sympathetic thing because I'm an axiologist, so everything is about value. Even if let's just say that I totally did hate religious people, axiology would tell me I still need to treat them as dignity beings. So it wouldn't matter.
Yeah.
And my, in a sense, ethical value is going to be way more than my disbelief. I mean, you say, let's see, are ideas more important than people? And I would, as axiologist, go, fuck no.
Right.
What the fuck? And
so I can criticize ideas while still being kind to the person who holds them.
Well, and absolutely, I always tell people, it's about my message. And some people get this, their message could be different. For me, my message is that I want to produce in a sense, a more caring world.
Right.
Like I told you before, my game is simple. I want to be a good human, and I want to inspire other people to be good humans. And I don't think you can do that abusing people.
No, that's right.
So I mean, that's like, are you anti-war? Do I believe in abusing people? No. So I'm anti-war. I'm anti the death penalty. I don't believe that once we have somebody neutralized as a threat, that we should just murder them.
Right.
I mean, other people have different opinions. I don't believe in torture.
Yeah.
Because all these things are the same value. I don't believe, as an axiologist, striving to be a good person, I should be doing abuse.
Yeah.
So
no, that sounds right to me. It's even why it's the same idea behind prison abolition, right?
Right.
Because the prison conditions that people are in are inhumane. They shouldn't be subjected to that. So
well, even before the conditions, I think the whole concept is inhumane.
Yeah, that's
the concept is punishment.
Yeah.
When really, to me, it should be about care and rehabilitation. And if, let's just say, someone is so horrid we can't let out. Okay, how about we figure out why they're that way and see what techniques could maybe solve that in a person who hasn't yet done that, but could potentially do that. And then, I don't know, get people mental health therapy for free that actually relieves this from society.
Yeah, that's right. Hey, Justin.
Hey, Justin.
Good morning. Thank you, fellas, for moving this early today.
Sure.
I had a work conflict that I forgot I had to do today. So thank you.
No problem. My important thing is that, the free flow of ideas. And then I also like good people. That's just a
thank you.
quirk of mine. And you happen to be, to me, a good person. So
thank you. Appreciate that. Likewise. Yeah, it's been a lot of fun, working with, Cory over the years and our event that we did together a few years ago. And yeah, it's just really nice to be able to have a nice chat on this Saturday morning.
Right on. Yeah, I wanted to hear about you and Cory, because obviously I've now been talking to Cory for a while, and I did want to hear about that. I also want to hear about your views politically and your views, about religion, both those.
Yeah.
And how you became, the way that you feel and think is important to me, like your upbringing and everything. I really want to hear about you, but I also like, when people give like the why, not just like a machine stating deep, because a lot of times when people go like, living with me, like, you're an atheist, you're an anti-religion, you must hate religious people. I'm like, no, I should care for religious people.
Yeah.
I feel deeply for them.
Right.
I was that, and I know what it feels like to be under that, in a sense, mental terror. And so,
yes.
So I just really like political. I mean, I'm an anarchist and a socialist. People bastardize those words all over the place, and I try.
Yeah.
I mean, even communists. I'm not in a sense anti-communist. It's just that few things don't fit with what I think, but I don't see those as bad people, and I really hate when people bastardize that term too. And so I really wanted to hear your side, because I feel that when we do this, it allows people to get a more healthy, in a sense, enriched understanding.
Sure. So, Cory and I have, known each other for a long time now. I think probably going back to 2017, 2018, something like that.
Maybe earlier.
Maybe even before that, earlier than that. It's kind of, but I was a secular activist for a long time. I was involved in the secular movement for a long time, and for a variety of reasons, some of them personal, some of them ideological, I left the secular movement in 2018. It was a variety of factors. I was having some health issues. My wife and I were having problems, and my passion for that specific mode of activism had kind of started to wane. And I had found that, and certainly obviously not you or Cory, but I kind of felt like the secular movement had gone in ways that I felt very uncomfortable with. I had a very unpleasant experience working for a national atheist organization, where I found that its leadership.
Oh, so I'm sorry, real quick.
Yeah.
Just so people, because there's people don't know you, just because me and Cory do.
Yeah, sure.
Could you tell us, obviously you're an atheist or what? Because I mean, people don't know you. I do, but
that's true. Okay, sure. So my name is Justin Clark. I'm a public historian based out of Indianapolis, Indiana. I was born and raised here in Indiana. I've lived here my entire life. I'm in various locales throughout the state. And I'm an atheist for sure. The term I tend to use more these days is secular humanist. That's the term I tend to prefer, largely because, as I've said to Cory and others, it kind of tells you what I believe in rather than what I don't. And I like the humanist tradition. I'm very influenced by writers like Paul Kurtz, who was a secular humanist. He really articulated the values of secular humanism very, very well. He was one of the founders of what would become the Center for Inquiry, which still exists today. And other leaders of that movement who've left an impression on me were one of sort of his mentors, a guy named Cory Lamont, who was immensely, I think, influential in my own development as a humanist and eventually as a socialist, because he was also a socialist, whereas Kurtz was much more of like a sort of a progressive liberal type. So humanism was something that had always attracted me. I grew up non-religious, so my parents were not explicitly anti-religious. They weren't atheists, but I just grew up in an environment where religion really didn't matter all that much. And so growing up, I probably went to church a handful of times, mostly for social occasions. I remember going to church with my dad and my sister and my mother, when my sister and my mother were baptized at the First Baptist Church in Shelbyville, Indiana, where I grew up. And my dad and I kind of looking at each other. My dad was, the big part of my own, secularism is because of my dad, who is very explicitly secular. I don't know if he'd identify as an atheist, but he certainly would identify as like an agnostic. And so we were just kind of sitting there watching them get baptized, kind of looking at each other going like, this is weird, right? Like, this is strange. And to this day, I still think it's rather strange. Just from a point of theology, right? Because like if the whole point is that Jesus died for your sins and washes them away, what's the point of washing twice? Like I've that's something I've never really understood, but again, I'm not a theologian, so.
Well, I know for at least for the church that I was in, it's because that's supposedly when you receive the Holy Spirit, like Jesus, because Jesus himself received the Holy Spirit.
Right. So it's kind of
like a dove or something. I can't remember this.
So it's like, it's very akin to a dishwasher. It's sort of the pre-wash rinse. Okay. So
no, the funny part is when the people say you can't understand the Bible without the Holy Spirit, in a sense, and you can't get the Holy Spirit until baptism. So I guess that's why Catholics, baptize the child, because then there's no excuse for your whole life.
Right. Yeah, and they have the whole confirmation process.
The pre-wash.
The pre-wash, yeah. So growing up, I was pretty explicitly, I wasn't anti-religious or whatever. And I went through high school for many, many years, just sort of not being interested in all that much in religion. I had gone to churches with friends. I remember one night I went to youth group and was at some local, rural, church, and being painfully bored, which was, found it very boring. Didn't think that anybody around me was asking good questions. I thought everybody was just sort of like going along to go along. And I was like, well, this isn't for me. And I think for me, what was a kind of an important moment was, I think it was either a junior or senior in high school. And I remember, so I'm a huge fan. I'm a big music guy. I'm a huge fan of Gary Newman. I don't know if you guys know who Gary Newman is.
But I'm into Slipknot.
Okay, so for most people, Gary Newman is the guy who did the song "Cars," like "Here in my car, I feel safest of all." So that's Gary Newman, right? So I was in kind of a Gary Newman phase in high school. I was listening to a ton of his music, and I was reading his Wikipedia page one day in the high school library, and I went to the personal life section, and I just read one sentence, and it was, "Gary Newman is an atheist," and I went, what the hell is that? Because growing up, I wasn't like religious, but I was not explicitly non-religious. So I didn't know what atheism was. And so then I clicked that, and then I read the Wikipedia page about atheism, and I went, well, I'll be damned, this is me. I'm an atheist. And so I was like, okay. And so from there, it was sort of discovering, once I got into college, it was kind of an intellectual awakening for me, in the sense that I was very interested in history. I'm an historian by trade, and I was very interested in learning more about religion, and specifically non-religion in America, in the history of free thought in the United States broadly, which is a very rich heritage that people don't always know. And so that became a big part of my my life's work, was sort of documenting and sharing the history of free thought, secularism, atheism in the United States. So my master's thesis was on a 19th century orator and free thinker by the name of Robert Ingersoll. I have a, let's see, I have a, so right there, so here somewhere, let me see my hand. There we go.
Yeah, I see it in the background.
So that is a lithograph from like 1888. That's from Puck Magazine of Ingersoll. He's called the Devil Bob in that picture. And then this over here is a portrait that was done based on a photograph of him from the 1890s by an artist named Woodrow Cowher, who is also an amazing tattoo artist, but he did portraits, and that's my favorite picture of Ingersoll, and he made a portrait of it. So Ingersoll was known as the great agnostic. He gave speeches all across the country, and critical of religion, and he would often have very rigorous and public debates with religious leaders. He didn't do them in the sort of like they met at an event and debated each other kind of format, but it was more of a sort of debate within the press. So Ingersoll would give an interview or write something, often in pamphlet form, that would be published, and then the preachers would respond to him, and then they would keep going back and forth, back and forth. Obviously in the late 19th century, late 1800s, there was no such thing as social media as we know it, but there really kind of was in the network of newspapers and pamphlets. So pamphlets were kind of the social media of their day. Sort of the Twitter of their day. These little pamphlets that would be anywhere from 5 cents, 10 cents, 15 cents, where Ingersoll worked with his publisher, C.P. Farrell, to publish these pamphlets, to get them out. And they would give them out at train stations. They would give them out at newsstands, anywhere they would give these out. And he became, next to Mark Twain, next to only Mark Twain, the most famous public speaker in America by the time of his death in 1899. His friends with presidents. He was very well positioned politically. He was almost considered to be the ambassador to Germany before his lack of religious beliefs, basically pulled him out of the running for that position. So he faced sort of discrimination to a certain extent as an atheist or as an agnostic. And so that was what really inspired me. And then, while I was doing all this research was when I was involved in the secular movement. And that kind of gets us back to where I started, where, I got really started getting involved in the secular movement around 2014, 2015, and was involved in organizations and social media groups and then, but by 2017, 2018, I was pretty burned out. And I think it was for a variety of reasons. A lot of them were personal, which I talked about earlier, but a lot of them were also very political. With Trump's election in 2016, I sort of went through a kind of political metamorphosis. I went from being sort of a pretty milquetoast, centrist, liberal type to today, which is that, I'm a Marxist-Leninist. I'm a communist. So and it was a long evolution.
Could you explain what that means for you?
Yeah, sure.
Because some people may know those names, but don't.
Yeah,
don't
sure.
Know.
So
in fact, I didn't even know about the term until I think 6 months ago when Cory talked about it. I didn't know. I mean, people would put. I didn't realize now.
Yeah,
they would they would just write ML, something. I didn't know what that meant.
Yeah, right. So. Okay, so broadly speaking, I'm a Marxist. So I am influenced by the writings and work of Karl Marx, the 19th century philosopher, historian, political economist, who argued for essentially a mode of thought called historical materialism or dialectical materialism, which is essentially that the material world in which we live in influences who we are. So like Marx wrote in the German Ideology that, life is defined, consciousness is not defined by life, but life is defined by I always get this mixed up. Consciousness is not defined by life, but life is defined by consciousness, in the sense that, like, basically we live in a material universe, and that living in this material universe influences who we are, that we're part of broader systems, and that those systems inexorably lead to class conflicts. This is where Marx wrote in the manifesto, the history of all hitherto is based on class struggle, right? So it's the bourgeoisie versus the proletariat being the working class, the bourgeoisie being the owning class. And so what separates me from a lot of other Marxists, because Marxism is a very rich tradition, it has many different modes, is that I'm a Leninist. So I follow the philosophy of V.I. Lenin, the leader of the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917, the first leader of the Soviet Union, who believed in essentially the only way to challenge capitalism is to overthrow it. That reformism is not enough, that you basically have to lead revolution. So in that sense, I'm a revolutionary Marxist, in that Marxism can be broadly split up into two factions. You have reformism and you have revolutionaries. The reformists are people, back in their time, people like Karl Kautsky or Edward Bernstein and others who were a part of, high German social democracy in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. They believed that if you built up a democratic system enough, and you just essentially did enough reforms within that system, it would eventually sort of morph and evolve into socialism. And Leninists reject that notion, basically, because if you've seen the history of the last 100 and some odd years, the only successful socialist systems that have ever existed are ones that followed the Leninist model. They're ones that, for the most part, the ones.
Well, I would say one second on that, though, just from my own personal opinion. Most socialism or communism in the world has been seriously attacked before it ever has a chance by America.
Right, absolutely.
Or by other capitalist countries that absolutely see any form of socialism, communism, which, even if it's democracy, as a complete threat to America.
Without a doubt, and I agree with that, and that's the nature.
I'm not saying that makes your statement false.
No, at all.
I think people think like that somehow socialism, the people will never desire this. Like,
right.
There's a lot of shit going on you must not actually know about, because people have actively worked very, very hard.
Right.
To kill anything that could be considered that. Go ahead.
And your point is very, very well taken, which is something, Lenin agrees with you on that. So, he wrote an entire book about this called Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism, where he lays it out explicitly why, imperial powers dominate the globe, and how they dominate the globe, and how they wield their power against what we are commonly called underdeveloped countries, but what the political theorist Michael Parenti calls the overexploited countries. They're not underdeveloped; they're overexploited.
Totally.
And so,
I agree.
As Leninists, we basically believe that in order to get to socialism, there has to be some form of revolutionary break that essentially upturns the system. Because right now we live under the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie, right? And the goal is to live under a workers' government, what Marx and Lenin had called the dictatorship of the proletariat, which, again, people hear the word dictatorship and blah, blah, blah. But basically what that just means is the rule of the people. It's just the rule of the workers. And so you have a system that protects the workers instead of protecting the owners. And that's the goal, right? And so, obviously, the history of Leninism is very complicated. It's complex. It has a lot of its own controversies. But in general, the reason that I'm a Leninist is that Leninism is predicated on a certain level of discipline. There's this, that's one of the values I think that Leninism brings to the table, is a sense of organization and discipline to struggles, which I think are essential, because the thing is that the ruling class, they're very, very well organized. They're very disciplined. They know exactly what they want. So we as workers, we in the working class, we have to be just as disciplined and just as professional and just as steadfast in our devotion to the cause as they are. because that's how we'll win. And so that's kind of my broader, political philosophy. And to, tie it back to discussing the secular movement, even before I became even as radical as I am today, like I basically just saw that within the secular movement, there were a lot of currents that I was not very comfortable with. Basically,
could you go ahead and say some?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been extremely critical of the new atheists. I've been very critical of people like Sam Harris and Christopher Hitchens and Richard Dawkins and Daniel Dennett. Cory and I did a whole episode on one of Dennett's books, which I think is awful. And so,
I agree with you. In fact, I tell people all the time, I am not a new atheist.
Yes, so do I. And the thing is, and this is one thing that's important, is that like the new atheism is not so much a organic social movement so much as it was a media phenomenon. And I think that's kind of the better way to explain it, because like no one would ever say I'm a new atheist. Like that term was used by journalists to describe this sort of upswell.
But I would say that it did have a phenomenon. The phenomenon was, to me, in a sense, the belief that Islamophobia was a genuine thing that they needed to fight, and that the new atheists were going to take it out to the streets so we didn't have another 9/11. And if 9/11 wouldn't have happened, in a sense, there would have not have been this uproar of new atheists. And that's why I go, I would be an atheist if there never was a 9/11.
Yeah,
ever.
Same.
So,
and I was
zero to do with what I think.
Right. I was 11 years old when 9/11 happened. It didn't have that much of an effect on me politically or intellectually. But basically my general critique of a lot of the modern secular movement is that I find a lot of its politics to be very retrograde. A lot of people within the secular movement are either conservatives. You have people like Robert Price, who is explicitly, who's an author who's basically a mythicist who believes that Christ was a mythical figure instead of an historical one. Price is a Trump supporter. He's also a virulent racist.
You could stop a Trump supporter right there.
Yeah, I mean,
in fact, anyone who's Trump supporter, I consider to be blocked.
Yeah, pretty much. And then, if you look at somebody like Sam Harris, like I think Sam Harris is a racist. Like I think that his peddling of race science and sort of, relitigating the relevance of race science with discredited pseudoscientists like Charles Murray is pretty disgusting. I think that obviously once I started seeing elements of the secular movement embrace people like Jordan Peterson, that was when I became very, very alarmed. And very much like, do you not understand what he's doing here? Like, do you not get it? And so, because these people, their commitment to, a hatred of socialism, like one of the things that's
that's a problem for me too.
Is
because
a huge,
I actively tell people I'm a socialist, and I've been telling. In fact, it's been on my cards since I think 2010 or something.
Yeah,
I've been saying atheist, anarchist, socialist.
Yeah,
and I support these values. And so I think it's always been an issue with me, and I've never ever been scared to tell anybody that. And I think that's really hurt me.
I think that's fair, right? That's why, like, there's. To me, within this broader secular movement, there's sort of I don't know how to describe it. There's sort of like the Temple of Sphinx, right? Like there's like this special like group of people who are the top people who kind of control the meta narrative about how people are secular. Like I cannot stress enough just how negative in general, like the influence of Richard Dawkins has been. Like one of the things I talked about Paul Kurtz earlier. Paul Kurtz was one of the founders of CFI. And towards the end of his life, he was very critical of the new atheist. He was very critical of the turn that the secular movement was going into because he thought it was reactionary. He thought it could lend itself to, right-wing movements. And he saw it as being, instead of a genuine counterpoint to religious extremism, a sort of form of problematic extremism in its own right. And because he was so vocal about these objections, the CFI board pushed him out. They didn't believe in his message. And now, within the last few years, Center for Inquiry merged with the Richard Dawkins Foundation.
It's like pure reactionary garbage now.
It's all pure reactionary garbage now, right? Like they literally just published a new edition of their magazine going after wokeness and stuff. It's this, I mean, it is so reactionary and right wing. And, you know, and so that's what drives me crazy, is the fact that, you know, and Richard Dawkins did something recently where he was like, he like sided with some fundamentalist group because they were doing something critical of, like, you know, essentially, you know, social justice and you know, tolerance and all of that. Like that's the thing I think that's so important about, like, if you look at the four like main atheists, like the four horsemen, right? They're all bigots. Like, they are all unreservedly bigots, and Dennett less so. But like, if you read like his book Breaking the Spell, which I have, Cory and I have done an entire episode on, there's some like disgusting like white man's burden shit in that book it is absolutely atrocious. I mean, Dawkins is a virulent racist, which is no surprise because he was born in colonial Kenya as a part of the British Empire. It's not surprising that like Dawkins is the way he is. Sam Harris is a trust fund.
Well, can I just say something about that?
Yeah.
I mean, I was born into absolute bigots, absolute religious fanatics. If they wore white t-shirt, not white t-shirts, white sheets with huge red writing telling people to go to hell, go knocking on our neighbors' doors. Everyone thought we were Jehovah's Witness. They're so absolutely nutcase. I don't do that. I'm not a bigot. I certainly try not to. And so likewise, I just wanted to say that I don't think that it's a good excuse that you were born someplace that you have to be a certain way. Also, let me make a comment. Because of the extreme abuse I suffered as a child from these religious bigots, especially my father, I became a high-functioning sociopath. Actually, I used to be a low-functioning sociopath. I'm now high-functioning, and that still is not an excuse for that behavior, for hatred. It just means I have a low empathy. It doesn't mean I have a lack of understanding that empathy is important.
Right.
It's just that most people are sociopaths go, I don't care. Not that they don't know, they don't care. But I realize, so I'm just saying, I'm not saying that it doesn't give a reason why he chose to stay that way, because he kept his upbringing and valued it. I'm just saying, I do not buy the bullshit that somebody has a bad upbringing and that is somehow an excuse for their behavior. Wrong. I
agree with you. And that was, you know, my general point was basically saying that, like, kind of going back to, like, we're all shaped by material conditions, and we can sort of reject certain things or we can accept certain things. I think with Dawkins, I think he's always been, you know, I think instead of sort of rejecting some of the intolerance of his upbringing, I think he just kind of accepted it. I also
did you remember that one time when he said that it was okay or not a big deal that he was sexually molested, and that other people that have a problem with it, that maybe they have a problem, I mean, or something like that. That's just absolutely disgusting.
I mean, he said all kinds of insane, horrible shit, like, you know, where it was like, you know, if a woman knows her child's going to have Down syndrome, she should have the right to get rid of that kid. Like, there's all kinds of things that, like obviously, like the whole clock boy incident, which people don't really remember, but basically, like,
it's gone now.
There was this young man who was a Muslim, and he went to an American high school. He was an American citizen, and he had made this device, which was essentially like a nuclear clock. Like it was one of those. It was like the timing was like precision. It was like an incredible device that was built by this like 14-year-old kid. And Dawkins, who's supposed to be like this science communicator, right? Like he, like, you know, that was his position at like Oxford or whatever. And instead of like going like, wow, that's amazing that you built that, like, that's so cool, he basically said that the kid because this kid brought this into school, and if you didn't know what it was, there was a possibility, because it kind of looked like, to anybody who was kind of a moron, it kind of looked like a bomb, and because something that kind of looks like a bomb built by a brown kid, everybody collectively lost their shit, and he was like suspended and this and that and the other. And Dawkins supported them suspending that kid, even though, like, clearly he built a clock, and if you took 2 seconds to look at it, you'd realize, wait a minute, this is not a bomb, it's a clock. And so, you know, and then people called him out for basically being a racist, and then he kind of, you know, doubled down. He's an asshole. Like, I mean, the thing is that, like, that's the thing about a lot of the secular movement that drives me crazy, is that a lot of people who are in it are middle-class white men who are entitled assholes. And I think that the secular movement needs like a rejuvenation, because quite frankly, a lot of the people who came up during the secular movement, who became popular during the secular movement, ended up becoming absolute cretins. They became people who were Trumpers. They became white supremacists. They became part of the alt-right. I don't think it's a coincidence that there's a overlap between some in the secular movement and the alt-right as it developed. You know, Richard Spencer explicitly called himself an atheist. Now, again, I'm not saying that like being a secular person lends you to that stuff. It doesn't. What I'm saying is that I think it's very important that there are these sort of retrograde and reactionary trends within the secular movement that lends people towards really awful politics, especially in regards to talking about Islam, because quite frankly, I find that especially with the new atheists, their obsession with Islam bordered on a fetish, and it was disgusting, because as a secular person, as a secular humanist, I believe that people have a right to believe what they want so long as they don't violate the rights of others. I believe in a secular society where people are allowed to have whatever faith they want or no faith at all. And we believe in a society of ecumenicalism and tolerance. That's the broader vision that I believe in. The new atheists don't believe in that. They believe genuinely, with like the hardcore fundamentalist Christians who ran our government during the peak of the new atheist years, like the Bush years, they believed that we were in a holy war with Islam and fighting to defend Western civilization, whatever that is. Which is basically,
whenever someone says that, I already know they're a bigot.
Yes,
you
know, because it's
like a dog whistle. Oh, I'm
because,
a bigot. Oh, okay.
You know, 100 years ago, no one said Western civilization; they said Christendom. You know, or the white race. You know, it was, you know, Western civilization is the PC. It's, you know, it's the sort of PC version of that. So that's why I left the secular movement behind, was largely as a result that it did not reflect my values.
And on that note, I think of it a little different.
Mm-hmm.
The secular and atheist movement left me because I stood for values. I never changed. You look at my card, I still use the same card that from 2010. I didn't change anything because I don't need to. None of my values have changed. I exactly how I was then is that how I feel now. It's not different. Yeah. And so to me, I feel like they used to be okay with me. They liked me. I started going to conventions. I knew all the Matt Dillahunty. I talked to him even by myself about for philosophy. Me and him talking 45 minutes in a jacuzzi alone after a convention. I mean, Aaron Raw offered to have me come to his house. I knew these people personally.
Yeah.
And so I was being accepted until the Trumpism started. Yeah. And once that started, I agree. I don't think that Trumpism caused it. I think it gave them an out. In fact, one atheist that I blocked a whole shitload of people that said they were Trump supporters, but I blocked one where he said, he's what started me thinking I need to block these pieces of garbage, is he said, Trump makes it okay for me to say what I want, including being a racist or a bigot or whatever. I don't have to be PC. And I thought, that is a piece of shit person. I need to move them from my existence right now.
Yeah. Cory, did you have experiences like that on social media too?
Oh yeah, I lost lots of friends that I actually thought were like, we had set up events like debates and whatnot together. And at the time, I was even like trying to convince them to be, you know, more social justice minded. But then it's like, they considered me to be the brainwashed one.
Right.
So
politically, isn't both of you experienced probably the similar thing.
Yeah.
I wasn't really attacked for being socialist until Trump. Once that happened, then like you said, the new conservative movement or the old one that had been hiding came out of the woodwork in the atheist movement, and I got pushed away. In fact, one guy even recently, I blocked him like about a week ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, because he said, "You're a socialist. You're one of those communists that is for killing people," and I just went, "What the fuck?"
None of what you say makes sense.
I mean, I'm just saying it's still. I always think, you call yourself logical? if I have someone that has a word and I don't know, or if I think I know, I would say, what does that mean to you? And then here's a news flash. I would wait till they tell me before I make an assessment of what I should feel about it.
Right.
Unless that word is, like you said, if someone says, some racist thing, and I know that's attached to something, but if there's something I'm sure about, I should be asking. And so to me, I just find those people that think that they're rational, logical, absolutely nothing of the kind. That's like when I talked about the Cory, I said last time we talked that I have this meme or art that I made of, I think, 30 different alcohol things from archaeology. Every one of them are archaeological data. And they're put together, and I say that this shows how there's a link between paganism and alcohol. And he goes, oh, you're wishful thinking to think that relates to archaeology. I'm thinking, first off, every single one of those is archaeology. And it's funny that he would say that. I was thinking, has he asked me, do I have data to support it? Does he ask me, what's the consensus opinion of archaeologists who have looked at that meme? Because they say this is amazing. I guess he's not one of them. Then I looked at his thing, and he's not even an archaeologist or an anthropologist or a historian, nor does he say that he is. How is he making such a value judgment with no information? And not even asking me, I have a blog that explains it in about, 100 pages. Does he ask about that? Did he say invalid? No. They just, but yet, so I feel like part of what's wrong with the secular, atheist, whatever movements is they act like they are inherently logical, born knowing or something, without even assessing, and then they will keep their script of what they thought before, no matter what facts or relevant information. I'm like, here's what socialism means. Here's what communism means. I pretty much could support that, no problem. I certainly can support it better than I can support America.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I think that there's a lot of folks in this country who have just sort of a natural aversion to talking about ideas like socialism and communism, largely as a result, obviously, of the Cold War, the Red Scares of the 1920s and the 1940s and 50s. I had a friend describe it to me this way. Anti-communism is sort of a background radiation in the United States and Canada that's just sort of there. And it's sort of naturally, the thing. So it's very hard to really penetrate that. Although I think that's changing. I think that's really changing because more and more young people, people like me, I'm going to be 32 next month. I've grown up in a world. The only thing I've ever known is America being shit. I don't really remember a time of America being great or things working in this country. Everything has always been kind of shit. And so why would I want to defend a system that has never really been there for me? You know what I mean? The other point I wanted to make was your thing about when you're talking about logic. So one of the things I think is very important about the secular movement, and one of my criticisms of it, especially people like Sam Harris, because I think Sam Harris is a moron. So also just as a quick note, for those who don't know, I'm going to do a little history lesson. So why did Sam Harris kind of come out of nowhere? It seemed like, who the fuck is this guy? And there's a really good reason for that, which is that Sam Harris is a trust fund baby. So Sam Harris's mother is Susan Harris, and Susan Harris is the creator of the Golden Girls, the classic iconic television show. She made a ton of money making that show. And so he grew up never having to worry about anything his entire life. So when you read his book, The End of Faith, he just casually says, well, I took a year off from Stanford, 2 years off from Stanford to go meditate in the Himalayas or some shit. And I'm like, how the fuck did you afford to do that? Oh, it's because you're a trust fund baby. It's because your mom paid for it all. And I think, and again, there's nothing, again, I'm not saying that if you come from a place of wealth that you can't do good things. I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is that why did Sam Harris come out of nowhere? Because he's not particularly interesting. He's not particularly insightful. Why is he a thing? And I think it's because
I think he's insightful in the sense of his pseudo thinking fits the bigots' pre-thinking. Like I said,
right?
They don't learn stuff. They just like a Christian. They cherry pick. They go, oh, that sounds like something I can agree with.
Yeah,
I'm like, yeah, that's not logical though.
And so with Harris, I think what's immensely important is that he is an embodiment of what I call the cult of reason, which is that they are people who sound reasonable. They use the veneer of rationality and logical thinking as a means to push forward deeply irrational ideas, like him calling for a nuclear first strike in the against like the Middle East, or like
Right.
calling for essentially calling
He
for
did that?
racial. Yeah. In the End of Faith, he has this elaborate, what he calls a thought experiment. What Harris does is what I call the Harris two-step, which is that he will posit something so absolutely batshit that would never happen in reality, that's so crazy that it makes his position, which is also very crazy, look normal in comparison to the batshit example that he came up with. So he came up with like this like thought scenario where Muslim terrorists or whatever had like set up a bomb in Los Angeles, and that the way to take them out was through some form of nuclear first strike or whatever. Or no, with the bomb in Los Angeles example, which would again almost never fucking happen, right? Is that he basically says like, because they've set this up, they're extremists, then we should be able to torture them. That was the example he used to defend the use of torture.
Right.
And then he supported a nuclear first strike. He believes in racial profiling. And then the one thing that I think is very, very important about Sam Harris too, is that you almost never, ever, ever hear him criticize Israel, ever. He even wrote an entire article that he said why I don't criticize Israel, because he's a Zionist. So
Right.
it's and so again, the human rights abuses against
Which Zionism is an interesting thing for a non-religious person, because most of what they think is basically built off, I don't know, the Bible or some kind of belief in the Bible's accuracy that they supposed to live there. I mean,
well, so Cory and I did an episode of our podcast, Red Reviews, on Edward Said's excellent book, The Question of Palestine. And he lays out the history of Zionism. If you study the history of Zionism, it is essentially a settler colonial white supremacist movement. Like that is what it is. And I want to decouple Zionism from Judaism, because I think that a lot of people, they conflate the two, which is why any criticism of Zionism or any criticism of Israel is seen as anti-Semitic. My issue is not that. My issue is with the political ideology, which is predicated essentially on the ethnic cleansing of another people, i.e. the Palestinians. Yeah. And it's no surprise that the most steadfast supporter of Israel is the United States, who performed an act of ethnic cleansing and genocide to build this country, which was the genocide against our native peoples. So it's no surprise that this sort of white supremacist settler colonial project has continued into Israel and has been essentially, funded and influenced by the United States, who then in turn, the Israeli defense forces then come and train cops in the United States. It's like, it's all a network of, cultural, like settler colonial domination. And Sam Harris never criticizes that and refuses. And I'm like,
and I think it's really interesting too, because I talked to this one guy. He said, I don't like Zionists. I'm an anti-Zionist. Thus, I hate Israel. Yeah. And then he goes, so fuck the Jews. And I'm like, see,
wait,
you're not getting it.
You're so close.
I hate America does not mean I hate Americans. It means I hate the government. People had no problem hating Trump, but still saying they loved America. I don't get why they have any problem. Do you not realize that Israel is run by conservatives?
Yes.
Yeah.
Trumps, whatever. So I don't even get why liberals support this shit, because liberals should have no problem going, look, there's a conservative, fuck them. And so I could still support Israeli people and Palestinian people and still say fuck the government.
Right.
It's not the same, and it shouldn't be the same to me. An anti-Zionist doesn't mean I hate all fucking Jewish people.
Of course, like without a doubt. And so like the way I kind of say it is that like Judaism is a religion. It's also, and to a certain greater or less extent, an ethnic group, right? But then Zionism is a political project. It's not a religious project. It's a political one, right?
Yeah.
There are many Jewish people who have been heavily critical of Zionism. Some of the most influential minds of the 20th century, who themselves were Jewish, were very critical of either Zionism in general or specific policies related to Zionism. So I've written about Erich Fromm, the 20th century psychoanalyst and Marxist, who was not a Zionist, and it was very critical of Zionism as a Jewish person. And Albert fucking Einstein. Albert Einstein was critical of Zionism as a Jewish person. And he even, to a certain greater or less extent, supported the creation of Israel, but was very critical of some of the abuses or some of the more sort of nefarious trends within Zionism itself. I have a friend of mine who is Jewish. She has been involved in many different Jewish organizations. She takes her heritage and her faith very seriously, but she's also very critical of Zionism. So it's right. You can be committed to Judaism as a project and not be and be critical of Zionism and the state of Israel, because it's a political project. Right. So when people say like, oh, this conflict has been going on for thousands of years. No, it fucking hasn't. Like this is a project that is related to specific trends that developed in the late 19th century that came to a head in 1948 with the establishment of Israel. This is the thing that's been going on for about a century. Not to mention the fact that Islam is not older than 2,000 years, right? Like if it was thousands of years old in terms of a fucking conflict, that would necessitate that Islam is older than it is. So it's just stupid when people say that. And you've heard smart people say that. Obama has said that. So it's like, it's like political leaders have said that. So,
well, I think they say it as an excuse.
Right.
Like as I don't have to actually say something negative because they've always done it. Well, they've always done racism. Should we, I don't know, not say something bad about racism?
And this is, and this brings me to a really important point that I think all of us agree on, which is that a lot of the ways in which violence, oppression exist in this system that we live in capitalism, people think of it as being natural. Well, it's natural that things are this way. No. It's human nature. Well, we know from our study of history, our study of archaeology and anthropology, our study of any different fields, political philosophy, we know that these systems are made. They're not born, and they can be as easily as unmade as they are made. That we have the choice to build a better system. We just choose not to because of incentives.
Well, and I did a whole, I don't know if you've seen any of them or heard about them or Cory told you about them, but I had me and Cory go through all history, starting from 300,000 years ago until 4,000, and explain all of it. And I showed that it was socialism and anarchism, then socialism. And then about 7,000 years ago, to me, we have the beginning of what I call arcane capitalism, land ownership, slavery comes. All these happen at the same time. Kings, statism happens shortly right after that, all of them relating to each other. In fact, after this show, the next shows we do for 12 shows is going to be about the emergence of statism, the emergence of the whole Mesopotamia. We're going to take 9,000 till 4,000 and explain it all in 12 shows to really show people so they can understand. I'm not making this up. The state was never not corrupt.
And you're in very good company. One of the future episodes that Cory and I are going to do is of this book, The Dawn of Everything by David Graeber and David Wengrow. And this book is absolutely incredible. People should check it out. But it's like what your project is, Damien. It's this huge sweeping history of humanity, which explains. Basically, they went to a more deep question, which was a big question everybody has these days is, why is there inequality? Which is an important question. That's a very important question. But Graeber and Wengrow get to the even more fundamental point, the foundational point, which is, why do we even consider inequality at all? Why is that even a thing to even think about? Why is it that inequality is something that we care about? And they trace the history of that. So I think it's so important because as you study history and you learn not just, modern history, which is what I do, my expertise is in American history, specifically the Gilded Age, the late 19th and early 20th centuries. That's my expertise. But also, like what you do, ancient history.
Yeah, I do prehistory. I tell people after 4,000, 5,000, yes, 4,000 iffy. But other than that, I almost don't know what I kind of know, probably much as a average person, maybe less. But
Yeah.
when you go older, man, that's what I know, because that's what I've been studying for the last 15 years.
That's wonderful.
When I became religious, it was because of my family. When I became anti-religious, it was actually because of college.
Yeah.
They made me take 2 classes. I wanted to be a Christian counselor.
Yep.
But when I took 2 classes, I have intellectual honesty. And when I took the classes, I went first class on world religions, and we took 10 different religions, and we broke every week we'd have to do a whole thing, not saying what's wrong with them, explain them how they believe. That's all.
Yeah.
No opinions, just how they believe. But what it made me do is realize, because I had never even studied 5 Christian religions. Of course, mine was the only correct one.
Right.
Like a Christian generally thinks.
Yep.
So once I started studying them, I went, wow, every single one of them has their own book, their own path to the afterlife, their own possible heaven or some kind of a better existence or whatever. And that they all can't be true.
Right.
And it was the first time, and as a Christian at the time, I know all these are false, but they all sound the same as mine. How the hell do I know mine is true?
Right.
It wasn't that I immediately knew Christianity was false, but I thought, do I really have any reason to believe that I'm right? And it was the first time I had actually thought about that question.
Mm-hmm.
How do I know that what I believe is even accurate?
Yeah.
So then the next class was that I thought I would ace in college. It was on understanding the Bible. That was the class. And it was basically because counselors obviously don't, especially in America, being pro-Christian, will push their values onto every client, whether they're Christian or not. And that actually is wrong. And in fact, there was a guy who was a pastor who got kicked out of our school because he said he would not sign a thing that he would counsel homosexuality as normal.
Mm.
And so they said, okay, great, go be a Christian counselor. You're out of here.
Yeah. I was so
for me, I wanted to be honest. I don't want to be a bigot. I want to understand. So, but when I did the Bible, I didn't make it halfway through the class. I turned atheist.
Yeah. I mean, that's where
I was just learning the facts of the Bible, and I was like, "Whoa!"
Yeah, it's. I think it's very hard unless you go to like a private Christian university where it's more about indoctrination rather than education, something like Liberty University or something. It's very hard to come out of college a fundamentalist. I'm not necessarily saying that you come out atheist, but I think it's very hard for anybody to come out of any kind of education and maintain that rigid position. I mean, and polling, polling and sociological studies have shown this, that the more educated a person is, the less religious they tend to be, like almost in general. And I went to a rural high school. My graduating class was 120. It was the kind of school that, that you drive your tractor to school on Fridays. The head of our biology department was a creationist, which is something I learned later on. But what she would do, because she was very sneaky. What she would do is she would teach her biology classes, and then she would leave discussing the theory of evolution to the end of the semester. So either she had to get through it quickly or she didn't get to it at all, which is kind of weird. Like trying to teach biology without teaching the theory of evolution is kind of like trying to teach like English and not reading Shakespeare. It's kind of important, or even learning grammar, right? Like if there are certain foundational things that you need to know in order for other things to make sense. Like
I feel called out. I'm not good at grammar or spelling.
No, that's okay. But basically,
nor have I ever read Shakespeare. Sorry.
But no, that's okay. But basically,
I do suck at English. So.
Well, I suck at math. So it's.
I suck at math too.
So it's each his own.
What I'm good at is reason.
Yeah.
That I am really skilled. But
yep.
But math and English, no.
So it's knowing that was the case, like I took a physics and chemistry like dual course in, I think, college or high school. It might have been college. No, I think it was high school. Either way. And the woman who taught it, I'm pretty sure was a religious fundamentalist too, because she would teach us about like basically like I don't know, like essentially theories of the universe that did not map onto reality, like basically like the evolution of the planet of the planet, like species on the planet couldn't happen because of the second law of thermodynamics, which is absurd because like, you know, the earth is not really under the second law of thermodynamics because of the fucking sun. Like, you know, light, the second law of thermodynamics is, like heat dissipates in a vacuum, but it's like the earth is not a fucking vacuum. We are constantly having heat and light given to us by the fucking sun. Like at some point when the sun goes out,
I try to explain that too sometimes for logic. When people are thinking about things, they act as if we're in a closed system. And I'm like, but we're not. So
we're not at all. And you know, and the thing about like Marxism is Marxism takes understanding and logic to a different place, because a lot of times we think of like linear logic or modal logic, right? And Marxism is dialectical, so it's very influenced by the philosopher Hegel. So basically it's about the ways in which concepts interact with one another and how they can change one another. That something that could be its opposite, that, you know, something could then turn into its opposite and vice versa. And that systems are dynamic and changing and flowing all of the time. And it's predicated on interactions between different things, concepts, you know, matter, people, whatever. And that dialectical method is such a strong method because it gets you to understand that life is not this like linear thing, that existence is not this linear thing, that it's this dynamic, multidimensional process that is constantly being evolving and changing based on current conditions. And so that's the thing that I think is so important. We as broader leftists, whatever flavor you are, we think in terms of systems and in terms of history. We don't think of people as atomized individuals. We think of people as existing within systems and how those systems influence them and consequently how they influence the system. And that's the dialectical process. And so that's what I find very interesting about Marxism, and something that has left, I think, a large impression on me. But yeah.
Right on. Well, I try to tell people that my way is axiological, which is that everything to me is a value structure.
Okay. And
everything is value systems, and including dialectical Marxism is a value structure that you're choosing to place on top of something. In other words, axiology though is not always just assessing, is it value, is it good, is it bad? It is a way that we place and position value, and then as you would say, you know, in the dialectical, there's a reason for that. And then that value moves. Change your values, change your life.
Yes.
In a moment. I mean, people go, well, I don't know about it. Really? So the moment that you became an atheist, nothing changed? Your values didn't change at all? Really? Yeah. Then maybe there really is a problem with you. Because that's why when they go with people, because this is so people can get it. I'll try to make it simple. Atheism is atheism, which means not theism. That's it. Mm-hmm. So everything else that people add to atheism is their own ideological adding or whatever. Now, I do think, like you said, things aren't in a system. The moment that you stop believing in a God, there generally, not always, a rationale behind it. Sometimes there isn't. That's like these people say to the Christians, I used to be an atheist. Well, you weren't really an atheist.
Yeah, it's the C.S. Lewis shit, right? Like, I don't think C.S. Lewis was ever really an atheist. I think he was somebody who was pretty goddamn ambivalent and then became a Christian.
Right. So in other words, they just take the actual meaning of not theism. So for a time, they did not feel theism was accurate. Does not mean that they actually assessed the value structure of theism, what it's doing, why it could be true or not. They're just basically saying, for a time, I didn't feel connected to God or whatever, or some nonsense. But to me, things should have meaning. Like if you say that you're a socialist, it shouldn't have no meaning in your life or how you behave. In other words, your behavior shouldn't stay the same as you were in a conservative. I mean, or a liberal or a Democrat or a progressive. I mean, some things should have changed in your behavior. And same to me, when people like, I'm an axiologist. because I say that, there should be things that make it obvious.
Yeah. No, that's a good point.
To me, because like you said about things are, it's not. And the reason I focus on it is because it's so powerful.
Mm-hmm.
It's powerful because when we start caring about values, it supersedes labels and terms and whatever. Because those labels and terms, if they don't have packed with values, then to me, what are they? Like you're talking about what a Zionist is, or what a communist is, or what an anarchist, or what a socialist. If they don't have these values inside them,
Mm-hmm.
they don't, and if accepting those values don't change your life, if you're still, like you said, the working class, if you believe the working class is total utter scum that doesn't deserve supporting, but you're a socialist, really?
Right.
Then you're not a socialism. You're not a socialist. You're Elon Musk.
Yeah.
Right, because he's a defender of freedom.
Yeah.
No, speech, as long as it's not against him.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fascinating that if you're in 2022 and you still see like Elon Musk or Bill Gates or Jeff Bezos as good people, I can't support that. How does the boot taste is kind of basically my thought. But yeah, I mean, I think it's so important, that centrality of values, because I believe that too, right? Like my lack of a belief in God is motivated really by two things. One, it's motivated by just not seeing the evidence for it. I believe in a material universe. I don't believe, one of my sort of, I guess, my axioms, if you will, is that I don't believe in wonder stuff. I don't think there are ghosts. I don't think there are spirits. There's no evidence to support this. Yeah. None. Right? It's an act of faith. And it's an act of faith that I'm not comfortable taking. Because here's the thing. If God is real, but I pretend that I believe in him, but I really don't, I'm kind of lying to God. I would rather be honest to God and it be at the end and him being like, well, why didn't you believe in me? Like, because you didn't really give me good reason to. And I didn't want to lie. Because lying is one of the fundamental problems. So, lying can be, most of the time, is pretty bad. So I don't want to lie to you. I don't want to pretend to believe in something I don't. It's very hard for, I think, most people to pretend to believe in things that they kind of don't, but some people are really good at it. Like, I think like Tucker Carlson is a good example of this. I don't think Tucker Carlson generally gives two flying fucks about anything he says. I just think he cares more about money and influence, because I remember when I was in middle school and high school was when, he wore the bow tie and supported President Bush and he supported the war in Iraq. And so he was like this hardcore neoconservative. And now he's like this like populist. And I'm like, but the Tucker Carlson of 2022 would not have agreed with the Tucker Carlson of 2003. Like those would have been very different. And I'm not saying that you're not allowed to change and grow, but like what I'm saying is that like, I don't think he cares.
Yeah.
And that takes a certain level of like disconnection from reality to do.
And as axiological, I would say it's immoral. Yeah. Or it's intellectually dishonest.
And so like I think that values are so important that has pushed me to what I am. The second thing, and this is, this goes back to what Cory and I talked about in our episode on Sartre, because I'm a huge fan of the existentialist philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre, who was also an atheist. He wrote an excellent essay, which was originally a speech he gave in 1945 called Existentialism Is Humanism. And what he talked about is he has this point, which is kind of like brilliant, and I love it, which is that whether God exists or not actually doesn't matter. And what he means by that is he says, let's say God does exist. You don't really have much of a connection to him, not that you know of. And the one that you pretend to have, you're still actively making that choice. Like you're actively making the choice to make certain decisions and to believe in certain moral precepts. Like you still have to act as an agent within society. You can't not act. You have to act, right? So whether God exists or not is kind of incidental, because you're still going to have to make moral choices in society. You're still going to have to make decisions regarding how you live. And so he basically says that like one radical way of being an atheist in some respects is not giving a fuck, about whether God exists or not, which I think is kind of neat. But
I would say, in axiological sense, that's where I start my atheism, my axiological atheism is apatheism. I try to explain this to Matt Dillahunty. He goes, "Well, I don't know how you could start," and so he goes, "I don't know how someone could start it in that." And I said, "I don't know, Matt. Let's take Matt Dillahunty, the skeptic. We stick him out in the universe, right? Somewhere in deep space with no planets, no light, no nothing around you. What would you know?"
Right.
And he said, "Nothing." And I said, "Right." And that's what you should start your thinking in, is that you have nothing to assess. Because he said everyone should assess the question of God. I said, no, they don't have to.
No.
There's nothing in the inherent in the world. You don't walk by a tree and go, I have to assess God. That's just, to me, to me, when I hear that, it's ludicrous.
Yeah. Most people don't think that way. And I think that for Dillahunty, that is remnants of his former fundamentalism.
Like totally.
So,
totally. Like somehow there's an inherent, I have to assess the God question. I'm like, actually you don't.
No, actually you don't. It doesn't really matter all that much. And that's the thing, is it's like, so for me, like, I'm kind of with you, Damien. Like, growing up, I guess, for lack of a better phrase, I was an apatheist. I didn't really care. It didn't mean anything to me. I always made the joke.
Which I say axiologically is a rational decision.
Right.
There's nothing. That's why I try to tell Matt Dillahunty, there's nothing that really inspires us besides bullshit culture. Nothing. Yep. And people go, oh, well, children are born or have a religious inclination. And I go, they have animism until 7 when they learn logic and realize that, in a sense, a leaf falling doesn't have some agency or whatever. A teddy bear isn't alive. You know, it have feelings.
Yeah, and with existentialism, because like we've talked about this, we've talked about the idea of abandonment, which is an idea that comes from Heidegger. And abandonment is basically the idea that when you realize that God doesn't exist, that God is not important, that it's on to you now. And generally, for most people, that induces in them a sense of deep anxiety and worry. And what the existentialists argue for is that it's very important for us to build systems and values that can replace the sort of traditional notions of God. Because
I would say that those are instilled, those are not inherent. That's why I try to help Matt Dillon understand there is a difference between nature and nurture. There is no nature for God. There is a nurture that people have nurtured this concept, as you said, nurtured values. But see, children as old as 3 months have, in a sense, ethics before any taught thing happened. Yep. So to think that it's inherent that we have ethical concerns, like as you mentioned, yes, that those concerns have to be or removed from religion. They always were. It's religious that have been hijacking like a tick and have been sitting on top of it.
That's a good point. So I guess like to kind of, to complement what you just said in terms of thinking about existentialism, it's sort of saying like there's this system that everybody's sort of been inculcated into for so long. And more and more people are finding out that it's absolute bullshit.
Yeah.
And that unless we can develop something that, a sort of universal ethic that helps people to embrace the beauty of ambiguity, because that's the big thing, right? Like we as secular folks, the one thing that all three of us are generally pretty good with is ambiguity, that there's just some stuff we don't know, and that's okay. There's some stuff we probably will never know, and that's okay.
And also though, as an axiologist, at least, and I'm sure all of you are doing it anyways, but as an axiologist also, I assess how should I act even though not knowing. In other words, someone said to me, well, there's the problem of, solipsism. And I said, axiology solves that really easily.
Yeah.
Axiology would say, okay, so you have two positions. One is that reality is not real and that real people are not hurt. Okay, so axiologically, I don't have to have a lot of moral anxiety because you just said nobody's really getting hurt. But on the other side, what if axiology assesses that reality could be real and thus real people are being hurt? Well, then there's a moral weight how I respond in that real world. So if I have the choice of no value or value, and I have to make a value choice, I would always err that I don't want to hurt people in a real world because it would have real consequences, meaning immediately my behavior should axiologically be ethical, caring, and whatever, kindness focused, because real people are being involved. The fact that it could be not is disregarded because the potential for harm, it's like saying, well, if I give a child a machine gun when they're 3 years old and it's loaded and the safety is off, and the child shoots someone, it's not my fault because I didn't know it was going to shoot someone. Come on.
Yeah.
Ridiculous.
Yeah, no, and I think that those are really good points there. What I'd say too is that, like, when you're thinking about the problem of hard solipsism, again, it just doesn't matter. Like, here's the thing.
It doesn't.
Let's say, for example, that it is real. Let's say that, you know, when we are brains in a vat or in the Matrix or what the fuck ever, right? Like, let's say when you die and you find out that, like, this existence that you're in ends, and you find out that you are in fact a brain in a vat, then that just means you're in a different form of existence. It just means that you're continuing the same processes that you used in the Matrix world that you would now use in the real world, and like, or whatever the real world is, right? Like, it's just a different form of existence. And many ways, you know, I would argue probably that the existence that we would leap into if we were if we leapt out of the Matrix or we got out of the vat or whatever, is probably follows probably a lot of some of the same precepts in terms of the laws of physics and whatnot. It's something like the whole problem of hard solipsism is the kind of stuff that people do in dorm rooms when they're stoned. And it's but it's not particularly like interesting. I've never thought of it as being particularly interesting. Other than
because you don't use it as a moral excuse for bad behavior, which I feel.
Yeah, that's right.
Like you said, an existential crisis. I talked about this before, but people who are nihilists, because axiology is an anti-nihilism form of philosophy. That nihilism is an emotional response, or you would say an existential crisis, or whatever, existential, uneasiness. That reality is not what they thought. Reality doesn't have some inherent things they were, in a sense, taught as religious. And so they can just not care. Because fuck it, you know?
Yeah.
To me, that like I said, that is an emotional response. That's not a reality. Still real people are being hurt. The fact that you don't care about it makes you a piece of shit.
Yeah. Because here's the thing, right? Let's say that we just to reaffirm your point, like, let's say we are in the Matrix or whatever, then you still then this is the existence you're in.
You still have to act as if it's real.
You still have to act as if it's real.
That is my point. Axiologically, it is the right answer. Because they always go, "Oh, there's no right answer." Yes, there is. Absolutely, there is.
You can just take the precedent that existence exists and move on, because it doesn't matter. Like, these are the things. Like, it's because what I'm much more interested in, much like with you, is that I'm just much more interested in how we can be good to one another.
Like I said, that's one of the reasons why and the reason I started axiology is not because I was addicted to that. It's that I was in class as a counselor, and it was for moral theory, which was a horrid class, worthless as far as philosophy now. Oh God, terrible. But the teacher says, pick the morality that appeals to you. That almost made me feel like throwing up in my mouth. That made me feel so. Wait a minute. Are you saying out of all these ones that are extremely different, we can't judge which ones are more preferable? More effective at, I don't know, human flourishing? You really?
Yeah.
And
no, just pick one. The one you like the best.
And that made me go, okay, how do we assess ethics? And that's where I learned about meta-ethics. And then I wrote, meta-ethics cares about values. And value is axiology. And axiology gives precepts to all these things. And then I realized, well, fuck, why are we studying that?
Right. You're getting to the heart of the question.
That's right.
Which is great.
Fuck this bullshit. How are we supposed to? Because then I realized actually axiology is used in science all the time.
Yes, absolutely.
Because and in fact, people don't realize this. Every statement you call true is a value judgment of what you have assessed, whether it's true or not, have assessed, in your opinion, that it
Yep.
fits an accuracy, that it fits something that is, in a sense, evidence supported or justified in some other way, reasoned, including logic. When they say, oh, well, that's a logical fallacy. They talk as if somewhere we can find logical fallacies in the ground. And we can
It's like they exist in the wild. Yeah.
Yeah, exist in the wild. I'm like,
They don't.
they don't. And someone made that, and then you're accepting that that's accurate.
Yeah. I find people
Which is a value judgment.
Right. I find that people who talk in like logical fallacies, to me, it's very much like a thought-stopping operation, because then at that point we're not having a conversation, we're not having a fruitful dialogue with one another, and instead you're just sort of regurgitating this prepackaged shit. Instead of, you'll say, well, that's moving the goalpost. How is it moving the goalpost? Explain that to me.
Yeah.
Work through that.
I know I had a friend. I can talk to people out in the public, no problem, because I know how to talk ghetto. I mean, I don't even have to use any words from philosophy because I'm from there. I didn't start in philosophy. I started from the ghetto, and then I learned philosophy.
Yeah.
But most of it, I don't even follow exactly the way you do, because I don't see it as valuable. Like you said about the essential question, I want to know how we get to good thinking. I want to know what's good reason. I don't want to hear this 10,000 bullshit stuff, because I always go to the end. Are you saying that theory actually produces truth? Oh, well, we don't know what truth is. Oh, well, then I'm done listening to you.
Yeah.
Oh, fuck.
And that's the problem. I think that philosophy has generally, the track of philosophy over the last 100 years has been, I think, really disastrous, because, and I'm not saying this like in like the stupid Jordan Peterson way, because what I'm actually saying is that, like, some of the greatest philosophers always considered moral questions. The question of how we live with one another was always very central to any moral,
including Socrates,
right? You can go to Aristotle, obviously, some of the people like Hume, Kant, Hegel, Marx, they all thought about ways in which we can live with one another.
Well, by the way, if you look up axiology and atheism, it says that Marx's theory is axiological.
Oh, totally. Without a doubt. Yeah. So, we start with some fundamentals.
That should surprise you, but I mean.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, it's fun. There are some fundamentals that we accept and move from there. Right. And so what I was going to say was basically like, starting about 100 so years ago, a little more, philosophy did what was sort of called the analytical turn, where it became less and less about creating general overarching theories of conduct and morality and metaphysics, and it went being way more about the analysis of language and how language works and language games. This is the influence of somebody like Ludwig Wittgenstein, and who was a protege of Bertrand Russell, eventually, sort of separate himself from Russell. And that's where you get into, the whole, what is the meaning of is, like, what is like, and all of these sort of like breaking it down into these linguistic functions instead of connecting it to reality. And so it becomes this another form of, essentially theology. It's a secular theology, which is so divorced from reality. It's kind of like, how many angels sit on the head of a pin? Well, it's like, well, what is the definition of, how does language fit together in this sequence or whatever? And it's like, but that's not the point. Like, language is a tool. It's not the be all end all. It's the way that we connect with others and express ideas and build the world around us, ultimately to live good lives. The point is to live a good life.
And like you mentioned Wittgenstein, and it's like the idea of good. Those philosophers would ask you, well, what does good mean? Good for what?
I would say good is the thing that produces that which follows the accuracy of that behavior. There was a good thief, right?
Right.
Has to be able to steal, right? I mean, that doesn't make that, though, a good person. See, because then a person being good has to do with an ethical behavior, which then wouldn't involve stealing.
Right.
Right.
And it gets caught up in those word games, like you say, like, where now I have to define what good is, to be a good person is, and without just showing a behavior that's good and has beneficial results, right?
But even if you could show it, I agree with it's a game. And that's what I don't like. I'm very good at explaining axiology, ripping them apart with axiology. But like I said, I don't do debates because I don't feel like it's productive.
No.
It's not productive for me just to go around, like you said about using philosophy, even if I was excellent, and go ahead and rip everybody in half. And does that produce good behavior? Would that make people become good people? Actually, I think probably the opposite. If I taught, like I told Cory, I know how to do some things thinking-wise or communication-wise to manipulate people. I do not teach all of it because I do not want people to go out and manipulate people. I don't feel like it's a good thing. Yeah. So it shouldn't be something that I should teach, even though I can do it. Because, like I said, my goal, just like you said, I tell people all the time, my game is simple. I want to be a good person. I want to inspire people to be good people.
Yeah.
I don't try to inspire people to have to be atheists or have to be an axiologist or have to be a socialist or have to be a skeptic. I desire that you are a good person.
Yes. And to me, that's the most important thing, is building a world where people are kind and are altruistic, that there's a communitarian ethic, that we're working together despite our differences, that sometimes we even celebrate our differences because through differences and discussions and dialogue comes better things. Yeah. And so that's what I care way more about. And that's why I find some of the sort of skeptic movement to be really reactionary, because it's, in that regard, they're kind of like fundamentalists, where they're just sort of like, we are the right people, we are the correct people, and you are not, and you have to be like us. And which is hilarious, considering that, like, one of the major skeptics in the skeptic movement is, somebody like Michael Shermer, who has very credible allegations of sexual misconduct against him. And has never faced any sort of repercussions for his abuse of power with women. So it's like, and that was kind of the other thing too, was during like 2017, like when the allegations against Lawrence Krauss came out, when the ones against Neil deGrasse Tyson came out, I was just kind of like, wait a minute here. And I realized that, like, this kind of stuff happened in my world too. Because when you think about, sexual abuse or anything like that, we often think of it as being, something that maybe only religious people do, whether it's priests or fundamentalist preachers or whatever. But it's like, no, actually, skeptics can do this too, because it's an abuse of power. And ultimately, it's about power. And the thing I have found is that there are a lot of people in the sciences who don't have any morals. And they don't care about them particularly. Like if you listen to somebody like Neil deGrasse Tyson or Lawrence Krauss, just to think of two examples, they always shit on philosophy. They're always crapping on philosophy. They're always, and it's like, but do you understand that, like, science is a form of philosophy? Like, it used to be called natural philosophy.
They have PhDs, which is a philosophy.
Yes, like it's
diploma or whatever.
That's right.
That's the thing for me that just drives me crazy, is it's like that we live in a society that's so predicated on the development of science and technology, where people really don't understand science and technology. And more importantly, if they do, they don't see the value in thinking through the consequences of their own actions in terms of science. It's the great scene in Jurassic Park, where Jeff Goldblum's character says, you spent all of this time thinking about whether you could instead of whether or not you should. And I think that's so important, because science without ethics is an absolute disaster. I mean, and it leads to the atomic bomb. It leads to death camps. It leads to eugenics and scientific racism. That if you disconnect the development of scientific ideas from any kind of moral considerations, then you are really going into a morass of objectionable ideas and behaviors that are ultimately antisocial. That's the other component, I think, is that I think a lot of people in the skeptic movement are antisocial. I think they don't give a shit about other people. And I
feel like there's a lot of, to me personally, anti-intellectualism.
Oh my God!
Even like when I challenged, if someone goes and watches my video with Matt Dillahunty, they'll see that I say things to him, and then he realizes that I'm probably smarter than him, or certainly understand or thought about subjects in a sense that he hadn't. Because he says, Damien, you need to understand, I just do a show. It's just a show. Nobody thinks as hard or as deep as you. And I thought, that right there is an unethical statement.
Yeah.
What the fuck? You are in the public sphere. People are listening to you. And your opinion is to defend yourself by saying, I don't have to think hard because I only have a show.
Yeah, I think that's, and also that just belies how he actually acts, which is that he takes the shit very seriously, which is, so it's like, you know, at some point, that was just a dodge. Like
Well, I've heard people call it a Dillahunty dodge, which I still say is unethical, because if you know that you're doing this, it's a logical fallacy. To knowingly do a logical fallacy is called intellectual dishonesty.
Yeah.
Which is unethical.
So it's that. So I think that's really where my shift happened, was basically that I cared far more about how do we build a society where we take care of each other and we're good to one another and people can flourish, rather than whether or not the guy in the sky is real. Like it's I find that the whole let's continue, like I can't imagine that people in 2022, who give a shit about the world we're living in right now, between hyperinflation, economic devastation, environmental destruction. We have so many real fucking problems that you're going to spend your time and your energy relitigating whether or not God exists. Come the fuck on. Like at some point, it just becomes mental masturbation. It's nothing more than nothing more than a performance that means absolutely nothing.
But
I don't care what
all those people that do that would say, even though it's actually not connected, that you should be supporting science. Nothing in atheism says you should support science. Nothing.
Right.
It means non-theism. It doesn't mean pro-science.
Right.
I mean, I think because I'm a rationalist, I think a rational person should also be pro-science because it's fucking true. But then, you should also be open to science is wrong.
Right.
Because sometimes it is.
Yeah.
Right. Or should I always support science when it leads to states developing eugenics policies and forcefully sterilizing people?
Yeah.
Many of whom were people of color, simply by virtue of thinking that they were a lesser race. Like, this is what I'm talking about. Is it
That's right.
The whole, like, I believe in science. Like, go fuck yourself. Like, my attitude about that is like, okay, you believe in science. That's wonderful. What are you going to do about it now? Because that's the thing that drives me crazy, especially liberals, is that they'll say like, well, I believe the science is very clear on climate change. I believe in the science. It's not enough to believe anymore. The planet's on fucking fire. You have to actively believe in doing something about it. It's not enough just to say you believe.
How about when the Democrats say that we need to stop child death? And I go, great. So when are we going to end capitalism?
Exactly.
Or at the very 8,000 children die a day in the world from fucking hunger, and you seem to not give a flipping shit about it.
Yeah.
Or at the very least, let's say we don't even go to socialism. At the very least, shouldn't we develop a universal healthcare system where everybody's needs are covered? Because the United States has one of the higher rates of infant mortality and mother mortality than other parts of the world. Like a tiny country like Cuba has a much better child mortality rate and has a much better rate of life for mothers after birth than the United States does. And Cuba is a country that's very poor due to a decades-long blockade by the United States that has developed one of the most pristine and recognized and respected medical systems in the world. And so that's what I'm saying, is that it's a question of values. Right.
I agree.
And so it all comes down to, do you actually give a shit about people? If you do, then you implement policies that actually benefit human beings, not money. One thing I always say all the time is, and it's actually, I think, a good lesson, ironically enough, from the Bible, which is you cannot serve two masters. And the Democratic Party tries to do this all the time. You can either serve the people or you can serve money. Which one do you want to serve?
Ultimately, they serve money.
They serve money because because they don't care. I mean, it's like Joe Biden going to the AFL-CIO conference recently and saying like, I'm pro-labor. We should pass the PRO Act. Wonderful. Then why don't you make Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema's lives a living fucking hell? Why don't you go to their office every day and say, if you don't support this, we will primary you. I will pull funding from your campaigns. I will make sure that the DCCC makes your life a living fucking hell if you don't support.
That will never happen.
But they don't.
Come on.
Yeah,
They won't,
exactly.
because Joe Biden is a shitty neoliberal corporate Democrat.
And the Democrats, and not just the corporate ones, the people would be mad at him for attacking other Democrats.
Right.
Because it's the sick thing. You should support them all, no matter how hideous
It's a team sport. It's not.
Exactly. It's a team sport.
It's the belief in comity among the Democratic Party is really regressive. I mean, look at AOC, for example, right? Like, AOC should be a pain in the ass to Joe Biden. Instead, she's a very compliant,
All of them
lieutenant.
are.
They all are.
Even Bernie Sanders said he would vote for Biden again. I'm like, really?
Well, that's where Bernie fucked up in 2020 when he kept saying, like, oh, Joe Biden's my friend. It's like, no, don't fucking say that. Like, this is the difference between me and a lot of people. So I think that politics is primarily based in conflict. Someone has to win and someone has to lose, right? It's not this like West Wing fantasy where we all get together and I show you my 42 slide PowerPoint presentation with all my facts and figures, and somehow that's going to make you believe in what I believe in. Like, that's absurd. Like, most people are not motivated that way.
Right.
Republicans understand this. Republicans are fundamentally better at politics in the United States than the Democrats are. And it's because they understand that politics is ultimately about conflict. I have to win and you have to lose. And I have no problem with you losing. And they're cool with that. The Democrats don't.
But so are the Democrats. That's the problem. Like, Nancy Pelosi actually said that we need a strong Republican Party. Really?
Right.
What the shit are you talking about? It's like saying
they fucking hate you. Like you are one of the most pro-corporate, crappy politicians that has ever been Speaker of the House. She's worth like $110 million, right? She has like 9 homes. She presided over the wife of an oil heiress. Like, it's the thing that. And then people call her a socialist. So my whole thing is,
which is like, disgusting. Like, come on,
or it's like, look,
that name.
If they're going to call you a socialist, you might as well be one, because it's they're going to do it anyway. I mean, so my whole thing is, it's like, because Republicans understand that the goal is to win. The goal is to win, and they don't. And Democrats, I think most Democrats don't like being in power. I think it scares them because then it goes back to the conflict I mentioned earlier, where it's like, well, we want to help the people, but we also have to serve money, and chances are we're going to serve money. So the Democratic Party has always been the party that pretends to give a shit about regular people. Now, there was a time, in this country's history, in the United States' history, where the Democrats at some point did give a shit about working people. Not all of them, certainly not women, certainly not people of color, but they did give a shit about working people. That was something that did matter during the age of FDR or the age of LBJ. There was a time where Democrats actually wielded power.
To me, that compared to the Republican Party, that yes, the Democrats are better.
Of course.
They're still pieces of shit. It's like looking at two kinds of fascists. Saying, well, the fascists of Italy is different than the fascists of Germany. Well,
right.
Yeah, I guess.
They're different, but
I always go back to Malcolm X's quote. I always go back to what Malcolm X said, which is, if you stab me in the back, and the conservative will pull the knife out 2 inches, the liberal will pull it out 5 inches, but it's still in my back.
Yeah.
Right. So ultimately, you're still stabbed. Like and that's the point. That's why I am a revolutionary Marxist, and I believe in a break with both mainstream political parties. I belong to a revolutionary Marxist party myself. I belong to the Party for Socialism and Liberation, the PSL, and we believe in radicals, socialists, communists, anarchists, what have you. Stop this abusive relationship with the Democratic Party. They don't love you. They don't give a shit about you. They don't care. You need to build institutions of working class power independent of them, and force them to either give in and do the right thing sometimes, which is what happened during the New Deal during the 1930s, because the U.S. Socialist Party was strong, the U.S. Communist Party was strong, unions were strong in the millions, you had constant strikes. 1937 was known as the year of strikes because everybody went on strike because they were like, fuck this shit, you know? And so that's what we need to build, are those institutions of working class power that will force the system to maybe be a little bit better, or ultimately that will break this system and replace it with something else. Because I don't know about you, but like, it's like Richard Wolff's quote. He says, like, if capitalism was a bad roommate, you would have left them long ago. And it's like, yeah, you know, like,
how my opinion is, capitalism is unethical, period.
Totally. Without a doubt.
To me, it's abuse. It's a person with the position of power hurting a position of someone who is weak and actually desperation. To me, it's unethical as hell.
Yes.
I told Cory, I'm going to be doing a jewelry business real quick. I'm just going to be doing it with my wife, so it's not like it's a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
As far as like I'm not having other employees.
Yeah.
But if I did, I don't know. I think they should have their value that they make. Because and I said, even if I felt that you needed to be charged some fee, would it be right if that fee was 90%, like it is now in capitalism? Really?
Yeah.
But would you say that I'm being friendly to Cory if Cory came and worked for me and I said, you know what, 90% of your value is gone? You know? So I'd say it actually would be better if I said 10% as a fee than to say 90%. But capitalism will never become ethical, because when I say that, capitalists are like, oh, hell, fuck no. Yeah, they don't even want to get close to any percentage that would be economical towards the labor ever.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, they go to other countries where it's even less, or go to slave labor by prisons where they can pay them like 35 cents, an hour or something, or whatever.
Or religious cults that essentially act as couriers of human trafficking. I mean, that was the FLDS Church out in the West. In the West, that was led by Warren Jeffs, was essentially a human trafficking operation, not only of labor for construction but also for child brides. I mean, it's all predicated on plundering the wealth and resources of others for your own gain that you did not make. Capitalists are leeches. People say that people who live on government benefits are like leeches or whatever. I'm like, the real leeches in our society are the capitalists. The capitalist class does nothing and they make all of the money, right? All they do is control the means of production, and simply by virtue of controlling it, they get to control everything. There's no moral reason for why, if you control the means of production, why you should control every penny of whatever.
Like I said, it's abuse.
It's
abuse. The person's in a vulnerable state.
Yeah,
and then you took advantage.
That's right. It's like Richard Wolff says. If capitalism was an abusive partner, you would have left them long ago.
Exactly.
So
or certainly you'd feel morally repugnant against it instead of the opposite of worshiping the billionaires. Like what?
Like I said, I can't imagine living in 2022 and still being a simp for capitalism.
Yeah.
I mean, that as it is, I can imagine somebody being sort of like a Robert Reich like liberal, somebody, there are a few liberals who I really admire, and Robert Reich is one of them, who advocate for, a more social democratic system, which would certainly be better than what we have. But, but he's been extremely critical of capitalism his entire career. And it's like, but if you're living in 2022 and you think everything is just great, you're either a beneficiary of the system or you're a dupe.
Right, you're privileged.
You're privileged, or you're just a dupe. Like you've bought you've bought into the propaganda. It's like George Carlin said, it's called the American dream for a reason, because you have to be asleep to believe it. I mean, it's not, the United States, the economic and social outcomes for my generation, the millennials. I was born in 1990. I'm sort of a midpoint millennial, or a later millennial. We will live shorter lives than our parents. We will make less money than our parents. We will have more precarious jobs than our parents did. And it's all predicated.
And they'll blame it all on you.
And they'll blame it all on me. And they've blamed it all on me my entire life. They call us lazy and entitled and self-absorbed. I have not met a more entitled, selfish generation than the boomers. The boomers are, without a doubt, the most selfish, fucking entitled generation that the United States or Canada or whatever has ever produced. These are people whose parents survived the Depression and fascism. Their parents busted their ass to give them everything. They were given fucking everything. They were given a golden ladder. And when they got to the top of it, they sawed it off and told everybody to go fuck themselves.
Well, I would say that can be a tendency. I don't like putting groups under a label.
No, that's fair. Not all of them are like that.
I'm 50.
Yeah.
I think we're at 51. Okay. My wife is 60.
Okay. So it's like I'm not saying everybody's like that, but like if you look at
my wife is more leftist than I am.
like the thing is that like not everybody's like that, but there are general trends. And the general trends map the way that I'm talking. So like, but I think a lot of it is just that in this country, the United States, we went from an ethic of we to an ethic of I. This is something that Cory and I will be talking about in a future episode when we talk about the book, The Upswing by Robert Putnam. And we went from a country that generally had a fairly communitarian ethic where across the board, and it was across social groups too, where people cared about one another. There was a certain level of people believed in government. They believed in the value of government to do the right thing, to provide for them and to create the conditions by which society could flourish. They believed in the power of institutions and experts to help guide them to make better policy decisions. We lived in a society of trust, and people trusted one another. And that has started to fall apart. And it's been falling apart since the 1960s. And it's no surprise that it's been falling apart since the 1960s, because that was when the economic system after the war started to break down, and it was replaced with neoliberalism. The idea that it's all up to you, you're on your own. It's the Margaret Thatcher thing. There is no such thing as society. There's only individuals, right? That whole ethic of that, or Reagan, right, that government is not the solution to the problem, it is the problem. That like attacking institutions, attacking people of expertise, attacking systems of mutual benefit for people, and constantly forcing individuals to basically take on the burdens that used to be collectively shared by society. And because we've done that, America is objectively more poor, less prosperous, less healthy, less wealthy, and less happy than it could possibly ever be. And so,
well, I would say the distribution is moved a little bit, but I don't personally agree that the system has ever been good. The system has been fucked since the beginning, and I'm talking 7,000 years. The whole before statism started, the whole thing about statism has been war and conquest. We're going to learn about it through Mesopotamia in our video series. But it's been war and conquest, and during that statism, they always said, "I want to be seen as the good shepherd." This is not a new idea. 5,500 years ago, or whatever it is, they said that because I think the smart mind realizes, if I make the people believe that I am working in their benefit, they will then voluntarily be more actionable to whatever I do, and make excuses for it and whatever. And they talk about, and we're going to, the historians, about the corruption level was outrageous, outrageous that people were being taxed. Because and this is what I think is funny too. People think that, to me, capitalism starts, or that the selling of things only started at a certain time, and that feudalism and all this. To me, you understand, there was always merchants from 5,000 or 6,000 years ago. All never stopped. Because what the state would do is tax you 30%. Well, that obviously means that it's not 100%. You're not working for the state. And some of that percentage is not going to your current family. You're selling it out in the thing. You're a merchant. They had artisans and stuff selling their stuff, just like they sell stuff today. So to me, there was always selling. You had, and in fact, I have a pyramid that shows hierarchy. Hierarchy is the same. The only thing different is person at top was a priest king, and then a king, not a priest no more. The priest just went down, but they already were there below the king anyways. They just, now there was no priest king. Although, as you see, like even in England, the monarchy and the religion are almost the same thing, because the religion was giving the monarchy their, in a sense, right to rule. And the right to rule, though, was already at the beginning, we're going to learn in Mesopotamia, already was stated that the goddess or god of the city's town or city-state was actually saying that this is our emissary, because God gave them, obviously, or goddess gave them the power to conquer these people. And so they have the right to rule, and they were chosen. I mean, all the theories are not like new. People only think they're new because they don't know all of history.
Yeah.
When you start learning all of history, you're like, holy shit, they just keep replaying the same bullshit. So to me, there's thought that with the slavery, right? Because I saw this thing where they said dialectical Marxism, which I agree Marx is correct. Capitalism is an invention by the oppressors, period, end of story. It was never that way. And even the beginning of capitalism, the people rebelled. There was the first labor strike against the Egyptians at 3,190 over the amount they were being not given for, I think, 2 or 3 weeks, their portions of beer and bread to actually build the pyramid. So the pyramid building stopped. And that's, but anyways, my point is, these are not new things.
Yes. No, history.
So my point is that just because there was slavery did not mean capitalism wasn't also occurring.
Right.
Just because there's feudalism and people have land in the sense that they are working for a feudal lord did not mean they're not selling things also. They're having their own little home garden or what. Or
markets don't imply capitalism. I mean, this is one of the problems with a lot of the sort of, people who are supportive of capitalism is that they'll say, well, the free market is a big part of, capitalism. Well, first off, there's no such thing as a free market. That's a myth, right? Markets are created. They are developed by government. The governments exist to establish the rules of the market. Capitalism developed, like the state as it exists today, explicitly developed to support capitalism as it was developing, right? And so like that is that goes back to Marx's point, but it's like, so there could be societies that have markets but are not capitalist, and there can be.
But what do you mean by capitalist? I find this to be, because if you read, in fact, speaking of capital, capital, that term comes from the ownership of cows. Yeah. And so it had to do with the Romans, and in the sense that a person was a leader of the cows, then you had, in a sense, a head of cattle or a bunch of them, and then you had capital. Capital did not invent with money. Money is something that happened way later, not the invention of, in a sense, product ownership of land. This whole concept to me is already pre-existing. And I would agree that the whole system we think of as capitalism, the whole system wasn't capitalistic, but there was capitalism in a small market capitalism. And I first would say arcane capitalism and then market capitalism, because it first starts looser than that. It's more like bazaars. Like you would say when I was in California, we have swap meet. We have a whole bunch of people that just come there and sell things. It's just, I mean, that kind of concept is earlier. And then I agree, the state wants to control, because I told you they're getting 30%. They're not letting you sell shit they don't know about. They're constantly monitoring how much you have and all that. So but that's not how it starts. It starts arcane to me, then it becomes market capitalism for a long time, because it exists like an undercurrent that the state is both stealing from and that it's also, in a sense, as you would say, like supporting in a sense. It wants these. It doesn't, in other words, it makes the first laws, some of them are about how you to interact in the market, not just ethically, like don't kill your wife or don't steal this. Yeah. So yes, in that sense, to me, the system of the government is supporting these markets.
Yes.
So they're not free, like you said. They're not free. I mean,
they're socially conditioned, and they're socially conditioned by laws. Capitalism, in a basic sense, is defined as an economic system based on the private ownership of the means of production. That's capitalism. And any other thing we can kind of talk about, because markets don't imply capitalism, because you can have markets without capitalism in sort of market socialist societies like the former Yugoslavia, or you can have capitalism without markets, which is in many ways what you see today, where you have, like the baby formula situation in this country, where you have three companies which are essentially a cartel who all collude with one another to set prices. The oil industry works that way. Aluminum works that way. They're not markets. they're cartels, and that centralization and cartelization leads to private monopolies. And these are, again, they're not market oriented. There's not a market for this. So that's what I'm saying is like, so the market fundamentalists, people who believe that capitalism implies markets, are wrong. They're just wrong. And if you study, like, as you said, the history, you'll learn that like there were market societies that were not capitalistic, and there's been capitalistic societies that had no markets. So,
well, but just because it has a market doesn't mean it's not market capitalism.
Yeah.
So, and just like I said, just because they have slavery did not mean that in America did not mean it wasn't capitalistic also.
Right. Absolutely. Without a doubt.
So I'm saying is I feel like sometimes people do this all or nothing.
Yeah.
Like, see this point? It's all or nothing. If they had slavery, if they had feudalism, capitalism couldn't be happening. If they had it, they didn't have a market. Well, they always had markets.
It's like the unsophisticated argument that socialism is when the government does stuff, and when the government does more and more stuff, it's communism. It's like, no, that's not really what that means. So,
if there's that case, I don't see why everyone wouldn't be a communist. The government should be doing more for us. I mean, I don't know.
Just a thought, you know.
We're gonna have a government. I don't know. I think they should be doing stuff for us.
Yeah, for sure. Well, fellas, thank you so much. This has been a lot of fun. I got to get going. Thank you for a wonderful conversation, Damien. It's great to see you again. We can definitely do this again in the future. Cory, thank you so much for facilitating. I always feel bad in these conversations because I worry maybe I don't always give you space to.
Oh, it's thoughts, all good.
But thank you both very, very much, and I look forward to chatting with you sometime soon.
Yeah, and you're welcome if you want to join us on one of the history things, or we're also going to do later. We're going to go through the anthropology of, in a sense, atheism.
Okay, cool.
We're going to start at sometime around probably 3,000-4,000 and go all the way to current day.
Awesome. That sounds great. Awesome. And I guess I'll do like the quick plug before I leave. But for people watching,
tell us about you.
For people watching, you can check out my work at justinclark.org. I'm taking a bit of a social media hiatus just for my own mental health, so just kind of check out everything there. I have a new article up there about an anarchist writer named Voltairine de Cleyre and the influence of Thomas Paine on her work. So go check that out. It's my latest article. So again, thank you both so much for a wonderful conversation.
Right on.
You bet.
All right. Take care, y'all.
Hello, and welcome to my channel. I am Damien Marie AtHope. In the simplest terms, I am an atheist-humanist philosopher and prehistorical writer-researcher at DamienMarieAtHope.com. I am specifically an axiological atheist. An axiological atheism can be thought to involve ethical and value theory reasoned and moral argument driven apatheism, agnosticism, atheism, antitheism, antireligionism, secularism, and humanism. Axiological atheists can be understood as a value theory or a value science atheist. As an axiological atheism's ethically reasoned and constructive pro-humanity. I am an axiological thinker, value theorist. The science of goodness, worthiness, usefulness, valuableness, virtue, reliableness, accuracy, validity, morality, integrity, beneficialness, etc., etc. We axiologists have a value consciousness. And in general, we see the architecture of humanistic humanitarianism value in people that we see as dignity beings. Places and things are not. Axiology is a value theory. In its broadest sense, it involves areas of philosophy that are deemed to encompass some evaluative or evaluation aspect. Therefore, it crosses almost all domains in some way or another. Now for a more detailed terms as to what I am. I am an axiological atheist, an anti-theist, an anti-religionist, secularist, humanist, rationalist, writer, artist, poet, philosopher, advocate, activist, with schooling in psychology, sociology, as well as I am an autodidact, self-taught in science, archaeology, anthropology, and philosophy. I promote science and am against pseudoscience, pseudohistory, pseudomorality, things that are found in religion.